for an application walkthrough for INSEAD. We have Cassandra with us here today from Fortuna Admissions, and she will be walking you through the application process. We have a couple of ways for you to interact. As the audience, you can interact on the chat box that's on the right-hand side of the screen. And if you have any specific questions for Cassandra, you can drop them in the Q&A box that's right under the chat box. And we will be selecting relevant questions from there. And I'll be asking Cassandra those. So hopefully you get your question answered. All right, Cassandra, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. So just by way of introduction, as mentioned, my name is Cassandra Pittman. I've been a admissions coach with Fortuna for almost 10 years now, I think. And prior to that, I had a career on the admissions teams at both INSEAD and London Business School. And then I actually did my full-time MBA at Columbia. So I've been on both sides of this process. I've been, part of the team that's deciding on which applicants we're going to take forward, and also certainly on the anxious side of whether or not my application was going to be one that was taken forward. So delighted to be with you here today to talk through the INSEAD application and what's going to look like for you and how you can succeed. Just to kind of level set, we do, as mentioned, we have a number of ways for you to ask questions. What we find in these sessions is it's not really the best forum to get into like the nitty gritty of your specific circumstance. We know everybody's unique, everybody's facing a unique thing. However, Fortuna does offer you the opportunity to have a 30-minute free consultation, completely free to you, with one of our experts. So really want to encourage you to use that as the forum to ask anything that's really specific. But here, please do ask those questions that are that you think would be applicable more generally to the wider audience of people who are on this call today. So let's jump in, and there'll be I'll pause for questions at certain stages, but feel free to put them in at any point. So this is the PDF of what your application will look like. A little bit of a little background here about how what they're going to measure you on. And one of the things that I really like about INSEAD is they're probably the most transparent in terms of how they evaluate your application. So here they say selection is based on a combination of your academic performance, your leadership potential, your personal characteristics, which is kind of, all the things that make you kind of unique about who you are, your international motivation, and your willingness to learn and contribute to the INSEAD community. Okay, so as you go through your application, you can have those qualities at top of mind. And what I want to encourage you to do is really write them out on a page and think to yourself, what have I done to demonstrate each one of these? And would you fill in the square, or some a little bit less? If it was like a fill in box, right? Would you say, yes, I've got enough on there on leadership potential. I feel like I've demonstrated that through examples, references, etc., my academic performance, etc. Is there any area of weakness? And if so, how can you address that through better storytelling throughout your application? So I just think it's wonderful that they're so transparent, and that gives you that anchor as you go through and fill out the application form. So the first thing you're going to do is select your campus choice. Do you want to be in France? Do you want to be in Singapore? Or are you fine with either? You can absolutely put either on, but know that if you don't have any preference, you will be expected to start at the campus that they offer you. Okay, so if you do have a preference, put that in. Usually, offers are made pretty much blind to the campus that you select. It can happen that the campus you select is full, and so they might offer you a place on the other campus, and you can then decide whether or not you want to accept that offer or not. However, they try to honor your first preference if you have one. Okay, so then after you tell them, where you want to start, you then just get into some basic questions about who you are, your name, how you prefer to be addressed, your date of birth, etc., the nationalities that you have, your address, your phone numbers. This is all pretty straightforward. Then they want you to indicate your LinkedIn ID. So any other professional networks you're on, make sure that your LinkedIn does match what you have elsewhere in your application and on your resume, et cetera. I know that seems like a basic thing, but you're going to want to make sure the two the on then you go into your exam results. Um, INSEAD does accept the GMAT, the GRE. They also accept the format and excuse me, the focus versions, the shorter versions. And so you want to you're going to self-declare your results here, whichever one you've taken. If you didn't do your undergraduate degree in an institution that was entirely taught in English, then you and English is not your first language, then you need to prove your English through either a TOEFL, PTE, or IELTS score, and you'll need to put that here as well. Um, Importantly, if a lot of people have said, well, I did a course and 1 year of a 3-year course was taught entirely in English, but the other 2 weren't, or it was bilingual. Unfortunately, that's not acceptable. The entire degree, all courses need to have been taught in English if English is not your first language. Um, then here you're going to fill in your academic degrees, what things you studied. So this can be postgraduate, undergraduate, anything that you actually um, received a degree for. You're going to want to put that in here, and you don't need to have your official original transcripts at this stage, but you will need them if you're admitted to the program. So and then here you're gonna list any kind of academic awards that you received during your time, anytime post secondary school, with undergraduate or postgraduate education. So let me pause there. That's all the kind of very straightforward, just putting in the facts, ma'am, kind of information about who you are and what you've studied in the past. Any questions on that so far?
So yes, one person has asked, does choosing the option either campus make me a better candidate or increase my chances?
So, in general, not really, right? So, in general, they make admissions decisions blind of campus choice, as I mentioned before. But it can happen that they offer you a place on the secondary campus. So, I would say only put in either campus if you really truly are. I would be fine to start in either. But also think about how your choice of campus selection um, fits into the other narrative that you're saying. So, for example, if you're saying, you really are keen on working in Asia, and you don't currently live in Asia, and you don't have anywhere in there that you want to start on the Singapore campus, or you want to take advantage of the exchange of the Singapore campus, they're going to be thinking, well, that's a little strange. Why aren't you leveraging this opportunity to build a network in Asia if you're saying that's your goal? So think about that overall narrative as it relates to your campus choice selection.
Okay, thank you. And then another person has asked, can they switch the campus in the middle of MBA program, and what's the requirements if they do?
Yeah, so there's an exchange program. If we come back up to that section here, um, so there's an exchange program, and you bid. Kind of, they have a bidding program. This is really common for business schools. You have points that you bid on for electives, et cetera. They have a similar process for bidding for campus exchange, and pretty much anybody who wants to exchange campus, gets the opportunity to, as long as you're willing to bid those points. And so you always have the opportunity to spend 1 or 2 of your 5. So there's INSEAD is broken up into 5 terms, and you have the opportunity to spend 1 or 2 of those terms on a different campus.
All right, thank you, Cassandra.
Okay, so moving along, just maybe a little fast. I don't want to make you dizzy with how fast I'm going down. Okay, so then, we've got where you want to study, your academic experience. Now we get into your work experience. So you want to start with your most recent company here. And they want to understand, how large is the company where you are? What sector are you involved in? What's the overall revenue of the company? And you can put that in the numbers in your local currency, and then they want to know which currency you're referring to here. Um, then they want to have details about your actual position, okay? And they want to know, are you planning on leaving the this role before the start of the program, significantly before the start of the program? They're going to later ask you, if you are, what are you going to do at that time? Your gross annual salary, your bonus, etc., the number of staff who are reporting to you if you're in a management position, um, who they can contact at your employer. They don't normally contact your employer, but they want to know if they needed to, could they? And whether or not your employer is sponsoring you to study on the MBA program. Okay, so remember that you also have your resume to complement this, but this gives you that gives them an opportunity to understand, an anchor. Like, for example, if you're working in a startup or a medium-sized company or something, they're gonna know if you work for JP Morgan or if you work for McKinsey. They understand that, but a lot of people working with companies, they don't quite understand what they do or the size or the scope, and this gives them the opportunity to understand that a little bit better. And then you have the opportunity here to list out, and you need to list out all of the full-time positions you've had in your career. This is normally starting from the time you graduated university, even if those are in the same company, but don't repeat what you've just written above. Okay, so even if you've had, if you had a role for just 3 months or 4 months, you need to put that in here. Um, and then you have to kind of tally up, taking away the breaks. What's the duration in months that you have held full-time postgraduate work? So not your internships at undergrad, but your postgraduate work. What's the number of months? Just keeping in mind that the average for INSEAD is usually just over 5 years for their full-time program of work experience. The range is usually 2 to 3 on the low end and goes to 7 to 8 on the high end. And so they just kind of want to see where you fit in that range. And then if you've had any gaps in employment, so if you took more than 2 months since leaving high school off, not working, then not working or not studying, I should say, they want to understand the explanation. So maybe you took a gap year, maybe you took a semester off, maybe you had a break in between leaving one company and joining another to learn a language. This is what they want to understand here. And then here you have an opportunity to put in that part-time work or the internships that you might have had, and you can include internships that you've done during your undergrad in that section as well. So those are just kind of the bio forms, and then we're going to get into a series of career-related essay questions. So before I do the essay questions, which is kind of where the meat of the application is, let me just pause and see if there are any questions on the bio form sections here.
All right. Can you hear me, Cassandra?
Yes.
All right. Okay, great. I was having some issues with the mic. Yes. So one person has asked that they spoke to an INSEAD admissions officer who said that the applicants have to get a referral from their current employer, but they have concerns. What are your thoughts on this? Have you seen applicants who were admitted without doing so, meaning getting a referral from their current employer?
Mhm. So it's pretty rare that you can't find somebody at your current company to write a recommendation. However, it is not that rare that you can't find or you can't ask for a recommendation from your current boss. So ideally, you do ask for a recommendation from your current boss, but or your current manager, I should say. But sometimes you can't, because that might, maybe you're up for promotion next month, and if you tip your hand and say you're going to leave to go to business school, you wouldn't get that promotion. Or maybe indicating you would leave would harm your bonus, or something like that. Those are legitimate reasons for you not to receive or not to ask your current manager for a recommendation. However, that needs to be explained in your application. If you go one step further and you say, there is not a single individual at this entire company who I trust to write a recommendation on my behalf, who knows me well enough that can speak to my ability to contribute and drive impact, you're going to need to have a very, very, very solid reason for that. So one such reason might be I work at a startup, and so or a scale up, and so there's only 3 people at the company, and right, there's just not a big enough group of people to ask for here. But if you work at a pretty good sized company, it would be a red flag if there was not somebody that you built that level of trust with to write that recommendation. If that is the position you're in, then you need to do your best to explain it and try to find a previous manager who can speak to your ability to contribute. But ideally, you are getting somebody from your current company.
Thank you, Cassandra. Very helpful. One other question is it worth mentioning old internships undertaken during undergrad?
Absolutely, in that internship section, particularly if they are part of your story, and we're going to talk about the kind of narrative that we're bringing in other parts of your application, then absolutely mention them. I mean, it's not a lot; it's just one line, so you're not going to have you're not going to go into depth here, but it gives the committee a sense that you were serious about exploring your career from a young age.
All right, and we'll take just one more. How much does the size of your company and their revenue matter? What if the company is too small with small revenue?
It doesn't matter, but it's all taken into context of what you're doing, right? So, um, you know, there's no such thing as too small with small revenue, right? Because again, you could be a startup and you could be, not having any revenue yet, and you're working on your growth plans, and it's all part of the story. But it helps them anchor, um, what kind of roles you have and how those roles should be calibrated against one another.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So moving on. So there are kind of two main areas of essays on the INSEAD application. There are career essays and then there are motivation essays. So these are the career essays. And the first one is they're going to ask you to summarize your current or most recent job, including the nature of your work, your major responsibilities, and where relevant, the employees under your supervision, the size of your budget, the clients you manage, and the results you've achieved. Now, remember that this works hand in hand with your resume. So, what I like about this is that it gives you 200 words to really talk about the what of what you do. What are you mainly responsible for? What are the kind of like the very tactical? This is how many employees I manage, or this is the size of my team, or this is the size of my budget that I manage, and this is what people rely on me to do. Then your your resume is really freed up to talk about the impact you've driven. You don't need to you don't need to take away precious space in your resume to talk about the what. You can really talk about the impact. And you also want to leave some space here to talk about major results that you've achieved as well. 200 words is not a lot of words to work with, but it usually is more than enough to tell this story about your current or most recent position. Then the next question is around what your next step would be in terms of position if you were to remain at the same company instead of going to business school. And this is really just about them understanding where you sit in the hierarchy, right? Because at one company, director can be very senior, and at another company, director can be not that senior at all, right? So this gives an opportunity for them to understand if you're going to stay, like, what's the next step you would take. So you want to talk about that in terms of title. How would your scope change? How would the people under your management change, or maybe it would be your first management position? What kind of budgets would you manage? What kind of impact would you be expected to drive, and how would that differ from what you're currently doing? That's how they want to understand that here, so they can understand, again, that hierarchy and where you sit on that trajectory. The next question is then giving a full description of your career since graduating from university. Describe your career path with the rationale behind your choices. And you have 300 words, which, depending on how long your career has been and how many changes you've had, can either be ample or can be a squeeze. Where I really want to draw your attention to is the rationale behind your choices. Love this question because it gives you the chance to really give the committee the insight into why you chose what you chose. And if you've made pivots, that's okay. What were you hoping to learn from that position? Maybe you wanted to work with a really inspirational leader that you met. Maybe you wanted to gain exposure to a certain industry. Maybe you've stayed at the same company, and here you can talk about what attracted you to that industry or that company, and really getting behind that why. That's going to really help feed into further conversations you have, not just in the essays here, but also in your interview that you hopefully have, where you're going to drill down on what you want to do next and how that fits into your story. The next question here is around discussing your short and long-term aspirations with an MBA from INSEAD. It's 100 words, so you need to be direct and to the point. What do you hope to do in the short term? When you think of short term, think immediately post-graduation, and think in terms of sector, company if you can, or companies if you can. So for example, if you say you want to work in strategy consulting, it's usually beneficial to name a couple of different consulting firms you might be open to. So think in terms of sector, companies, but also think in terms of location. What part of the world do you want to work in? INSEAD is arguably the best, MBA school in the MBA program in the world to position you for an international career. There's another couple good ones as well, but I'm not sure that anybody does it better than INSEAD at least. And so, try to think about how that plays into it as well. And then in terms of long term, you can paint kind of a long term vision. So that can be, I want to work in strategy consulting, and then I see myself kind of continuing on to the partner track, or it can be I want to gain solid experience in strategy consulting, and then ultimately pivot and hope to achieve a C-level position in strategy with a CPG company, or a company that is going to later feed into your goals. So whatever your goals are here, you're thinking immediate post graduation, and then kind of long-term vision. And then you have a link to that question you were asked before. So if you're not currently working, or if you plan to leave your current employer 2 months before the program starts, explain what you're doing. And here, what you don't want to say is, I've taken time off to prepare for my GMAT or my GRE, because a lot of people have to prepare for those exams while also juggling demanding careers and other initiatives. But if you are taking time off, or you have time off now, and you are working on a startup, or you are learning a language, or maybe you're doing, you want to do a pre-MBA internship because you want to pivot into a different industry. Those are all great things to write about here. So that is the career section. We're going to go on to international exposure and the motivation questions next. But before we do, any questions on the career essays?
Thank you, Cassandra. Yes, we have a few. So, one person is asking essentially that since they also need to upload their CV or resume, so what's going to be different in these questions as opposed to what they're mentioning in their CV or resume?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the career essay about your current role really gives you the opportunity to talk about the what of what you do. What are the responsibilities that you have? What's the size of your budget? What's the size of your team, if those things are relevant? Which frees up the space in your resume to just talk about impact. What are the impacts that you have made in the roles that you've had? That's important because, again, they'll understand what a junior consultant at McKinsey does, but if you if you have a role that with a company they're not super familiar with, they might not totally understand that what. And so you don't really want to spend precious space on your CV having to explain what this company is, what they do, what the job title means. You have that space in the application form to do that, and then you can just talk about, in this role, I drove X amount of increased revenue, for example, or you achieved Y amount of cost savings through an operational plan that you put into place, and you can really focus the resume on the impact there.
Thank you, Cassandra. And then someone asked if they can use bullet points to articulate the impact that they've created in the essay questions.
Yeah, I would definitely not use bullet points in the essay questions. They're essay questions. And I would definitely use them in narrative form, but bullet away on your resume.
And we'll take one last one. Um, One of the attendees is curious that how does working as a government officer in India affect their application, as all the impacts can't be quantified?
So I would challenge you that impact can always be quantified, even if that quantification is an estimate. So, government officer can mean lots of different things, and you could be working on lots of different projects. But even if I take, working with somebody, for example, in the foreign service in the U.S., um, you know, this person's entire job was to she was based in a country in Africa, and her entire job was to support individuals who had I don't know if you've ever received one of these messages that was like an email from like I'm a prince of so and so and so, and I have this money, da, da, da. So the entire job was to support people who had been conned and had flown to that country expecting to receive a sum of money. Um, so, you can't talk about a cost savings, you can't talk about a revenue increase, but she could certainly quantify the number of people whom she had supported, right, to rectify their problems or get them back home. And that's the kind of example. There's always something that you can quantify that can give um, the admissions committee an idea of the scope of impact and responsibility that you carry in your role.
Thank you. I'm sure that example was very useful.
Okay, wonderful. So let's move on to international exposure. International exposure, you will have noted it's one of that international motivation is one of the things that they assess quite carefully at INSEAD, and they really want to understand how this international motivation you've had has been demonstrated throughout your life. And the most concrete way that you can demonstrate your international motivation that you have is your past experience of seeking out international experiences. Okay, so here you're going to want to list the most significant examples you have of either living, studying, working, or traveling outside your home country or your home region. And you can certainly include projects that you've been on that have taken you abroad, personal travel, any kind of study abroad that you've had, any of that can work in here. Um, if you have not had any international exposure, physically living in or physically going to another country, you're going to want to use, your optional essay to explain what exposure you have had, and that could just be people you have worked with from other countries, and why it's so important for you to gain that exposure, and why that's part of the reason you're applying to INSEAD. So, moving on to languages, uh, INSEAD does have a three-language policy. So you need to come in with two languages. That's your mother tongue plus English, or if English is your mother tongue plus another one. And then you need to graduate with at least a basic level of a third language. You don't have to prove your native language. So they're not going to ask you, they're just going to trust you. Whatever your native language is, that's fine. However, your second language, you will need to provide evidence of. And that if your second language is English and you studied entirely your entire degree course at an English institution, then that will do it. Otherwise, you're going to need to provide a certification test on that one. Okay. Then here we get into your activities and interests. They want to know, who are you when you're not working? What else is interesting about you? Um, do you volunteer for, an organization near, where you live? Are you a gardener? Are you a magician? Do you play sports? Those are the kind of things you're going to want to, list here. And it's just a list. Um, and then any distinctions, honors, or awards you've achieved through your extracurricular activities. It's okay if you haven't achieved any, but if you have, you certainly want to list them here. Um, and then this is just kind of supplementary information. Has any of your family members attended INSEAD? If so, give them the details. Do you plan to come to the program with your partner or children? This doesn't impact your application at all, but they would, there's a vibrant INSEAD Partners Club, and they want to set you up for introductions to that club if that is applicable to you. They want to know if you are applying to the dual degree program, and you indicate that here, and then what other schools you've applied to. This won't impact your admissions, but they do kind of look to see how does this fit into your overall narrative. So, for example, if you're saying that getting international experience is super super important to you, but then all of the other schools you're applying to are in your home country, that's gonna raise a question. If you are a very, very, very competitive candidate and they think that you will also receive offers elsewhere that you are applying to, this can put you more in the running for spot scholarships. If you've had any military service, you're going to certainly want to list that here. And then we had a question about letters of recommendation. 2 letters of recommendation are required, and you list that here. And then they send, the letters are actually sent by, or sorry, the request for the recommendation is actually sent by INSEAD, and they fill in an online form. So we're going to go on to motivation essays, which is going to close us out. I'm aware of time, and we have less than 15 minutes to go through those. But any questions on in any of those sections before I go on to the motivation essays?
Thank you, Cassandra. Yeah, I'll just shoot you a couple of quick ones. Does traveling for leisure count under the international exposure section?
Yes, it does. So what I would say is, in general, here is the kind of, in order of magnitude, the kind of things you want to list. So first is any experience you have living in another country, actually living there. That's going to be your most substantial international experience. If you have that, that's what you're going to want to lead with. Second is any experience you have working in another country. So maybe you didn't live there, but maybe you were staffed on a project there and you were traveling there, weekly for 6 months, and then engaging with local teams in that kind of way. That's going to be kind of second order of magnitude what you're going to want to list. Third is leisure travel. And leisure travel can be really extensive, right? It can be, it looks like, this person who's asked this question seems to have traveled to lots and lots of different countries. You've traveled to 24 different countries by the time you were 24. I mean, that's really significant. And so you want to list that out. And if we go to that section of the application again, international exposure here. You can just, for example, let's say you have a couple of experiences, you say like, leisure travel from two, you put that over the years, and then you can list out the 24 different countries in a country and territory. So it doesn't just need to be one. Or maybe, maybe leisure travel is all you have. And then, maybe you list it by territory, APAC and, LATAM or whatever here. So absolutely do give the committee all of that context, knowing that you want to lead with the most impactful to what might be the least impactful.
Sounds good. And just for the interest of time, I think we can just move over to the essay section.
Great, sounds good. Okay, so going down again. So motivation essays, this is where you really, really get to tell your story about who you are. And honestly, INSEAD's motivation questions are among my favorite of any school. Even though the application is quite long, it's about 2,000 words. Um, I really think that they do a very deliberate and good job of trying to understand, give you the space to tell your story and understand really truly who you are beyond just your resume. So the first question here is give a candid description of yourself, who you are as a person, stressing the personal characteristics you feel to be your strengths and weaknesses and the main factors which have influenced your personal development, giving examples when necessary. So this is a 500-word essay. It inquires a lot of introspection, and this is really about who you are and what has made you who you are. Why do you get up in the morning, and what has sparked that motivation? And honestly, why should anybody care? about why you get up in the morning. So, good stories I've seen told here are about, potentially like um, growing up as maybe with parents who were immigrants to the country, and what it was like to kind of straddle two different cultural worlds. Or another might be um, um, the it's usually stories about like how you've grown up, maybe growing up in a household where excellence was really valued, and really kind of charting your own way. Maybe your parents wanted you to be a lawyer or a doctor, and you really wanted to pursue this passion in business. Maybe, and this was the case. I worked with a client who grew up thinking she was going to be an Olympic athlete, and she had been professionally swimming for. I mean, I think since she was, I mean, she was a competitive swimmer. I think from the time she was, I don't know, 6 or 7, and she missed the Olympic team in the trials by less than 2 seconds. And so her story was very much about that journey, of what that kind of discipline taught her, but also what that experience taught her, throughout that whole process. And so, every story here is going to be completely unique to you. But this is some of the most important thinking you can do about who you are and what has helped shaped you, and your values, and your motivations. So, really want to encourage you to spend as much time as you need on that question. It's probably the most important question in the entire application. So the next question is: consider a situation where you failed to achieve your objectives. How did you handle that failure? And how did you learn about yourself and your interactions with others from the situation? And I think that where I see clients stumble on this essay is when they try to pick a failure that isn't that big, because they don't really want to talk about a time they really failed, or they try to pick a failure that's like, really, well, I failed, but actually it was a success in the end. um that's not what the committee is looking for here. The best leaders are the leaders who can admit where they've gone wrong, what they didn't achieve, and how they can do better in the future. And they're looking for you to demonstrate the emotional maturity to be able to be backward looking in that way and say, I didn't do something that I wanted to do, that was within my power to do. And here's what I've learned about that. And here's how I'm taking that learning forward. Right. So a very, poignant example of that is the example that I mentioned of the client I worked with who missed the Olympic team by less than 2 seconds. But we all have examples of that. This often works better, not always, but often, as a professional or personal failure. It is rare that it's good to list here an academic failure. Um, I've seen it work, but it's rare. So I would encourage you to think about a more recent personal or professional failure and what you've learned and how you're taking it forward. Um, and then finally, there's kind of an anything else that wasn't covered. And here, if you did have an academic failure, that's probably, I would put that here as opposed to at the top there. But you might also talk about here something else that you're really passionate about that you weren't able to explain in the course of the application. Um, maybe you're really involved in politics, and you got involved in your last political campaign, and what you've learned and how you helped organize that. Maybe you were involved in a startup on the side, or you do investments on the side. I've seen a lot of different examples used here, and so you can absolutely use this section if there's something really, really interesting. The inside application is already quite long, and so if you feel your story is well told, without putting anything in here, and you don't have a weakness to address, don't feel the need to just write words here for the sake of writing words. This is really only if you have a weakness, or if there's something really compelling that's part of your story that you think you really want to share with the admissions committee that would make you, an even better candidate for admission for telling it. So that ends my portion of walking through the application. I know we have 5 minutes left, and I do want to get to any last questions. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Oops, thank you for that. Yeah, I was just saying that thank you for that thorough discussion of the application. A lot of the questions in the chat has already been answered, so I'm sure the audience is thankful for that. One of the questions that's relevant to what you just discussed is if someone wants to take the optional essay to talk about their academic performance, where can they explain not going abroad for international exposure?
So you would need to use the 300 words allotted to explain both. And you can feel free to do that. So in the kind of anything else essay, you can think of that as it doesn't need to be one coherent essay. It's fine if you have, a few sentences about one thing and a few sentences about another. That's totally fine.
All right, thank you. And we had a couple of questions about doing this as a second MBA. Do you encourage it, or how is it seen by the applications committee?
So it's pretty rare for all the top schools to see successful applicants who are coming in as a second MBA. It's not impossible, but it's rare. So if it is your second MBA, you're going to want to have a very, very tight narrative around why you need another MBA, why you did your first MBA, what's changed between then and now, and how this really fits into your next story. Remember that an MBA is also an academic pursuit. It's not just a means to your next job, although that's also a part of the story. And so if you have already done a graduate level Masters of Business Administration, where you got a general management toolkit from an academic perspective, there will be some understandable questions around why do you need another academic credential in this particular thing, and what's the academic pursuit that you're trying to achieve in addition to just the career pivot, or what it's bringing to your career. And so you're going to want to think through those kind of issues.
All right. And we just have another very quick question. The very popular one: what's the GMAT average or cutoff?
Yeah. So, I really want to just lead with some empathy here. It would be a whole lot easier, and this process would be just less crazy making if these schools said, if you do X, Y, and Z, you will get in. And if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you won't get in. Unfortunately, this process is riddled with uncertainty, and it's just kind of like a hey, do as good as you can do, and we'll see, and we'll measure it, and it will be subjective to a large extent, and that is crazy making. And in those kind of situations, we seek more definite binary answers so that we have a greater sense of control. But the truth is that any kind of sense of control I would give you, any kind of like truth and binary answers, it will be misleading because you don't have control in this process. But what is under your control is to do as good as you can possibly do. And INSEAD provides some rough guidance. So, for example, on the old GMAT score, what they say is aim for 70th percentile and above in both verbal and quant. And then they have some new guidance for the short scores as well, and they have some guidance for GRE, and you can find all of that on their website. I know with only 1 minute left, I don't want to spend a lot of time there, but that's just rough guidance. I have worked with people who have scored well below that and have other evidence of their academic capacity that they're able to put forward, and a great stellar application elsewhere and have gotten in. Equally, I have worked with people with 790 GMAT scores who just didn't have a lot that was compelling outside of that, and didn't get in. And so there's no cutoff, and it's not an exact science. It's a do as well as you can possibly do.
Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you to the audience for being here. The recording of this session will be available to you until August 10th, and then I've also put the URL of Fortuna Admissions in the chat. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.